to Padova, where we all met up at the Hotel Fagiano, had our welcome meeting, introduced ourselves. Then after the welcome meeting we met up and walked from the south of Padova, of course, to the north of Padova, heading up to the centre, and we were going out to have our first dinner together at the Corte dei Leone, the Court of the Lion, because we'd already passed the Palazzo della Ragione, which was in the medieval period the law courts. We met Marco, where we had our lovely first dinner together. Then back through town, past the old Roman ruins under the city, down past St. Anthony, beautifully lit by night, and back to the hotel quietly. Next morning, up, boxes on. After breakfast we headed off, and we were heading for the Scrovegni Chapel. There we checked in our bags and we went through the museum of the Scrovegni, but we were heading to not the Civic Museum, we were heading to the chapel of the Scrovegni, this family, these usurers who were very wealthy and who were the famous family of Padova, and who had this private chapel built attached to their palace. And we talked about the Renaissance period and how Giotto, the man who created these frescoes in the chapel, how he sort of kicked off the Renaissance period, still at the end of the medieval period, the most important person in the history of art. Then we saw the video about the content of the chapel, the life and death of Mary and the life and death of Jesus Christ. Then into the chapel to see this beautiful star-studded sky and these frescoes created on the walls of this chapel. The fresco created with the plaster that's wet, the paint put on the plaster after the helpers, the assistants, scratch out the stencil that the artist has already made. Graffitare, to scratch. We had not long enough in the chapel as usual, but long enough to enjoy it. Probably one of the singular most beautiful pieces of art, I think, in the world. Then we left the chapel. We met up with Christina, our guide, our local guide, who is also a Rick Steves guide, and we headed through the town of Padova to see some of the other sights of the city, but we were particularly heading for the anatomical theatre, the Teatro Anatomico, where you learned all about the university, because that theatre of course is in the Palazzo Bo, which is the University of Padova. And you saw the room where Galileo gave his lectures, all the coats of arms of all the people who've studied at that university, the second university of Italy, the third university of Europe. Then, after we'd seen the Teatro Anatomico from below, headed out, and we walked through the wonderful fresh market of the city. Then, for a little surprise, we decided we'd do what all the locals were doing at that time in the day, at midday, having a spritz, lo spritz we call it, the Aperol spritz or the Campari spritz. The Aperol spritz is the drink of Padova, in fact. From there you had a free afternoon, so you know what you did on that afternoon. I'd suggested perhaps the baptistry, I'd suggested San Antonio and the cloister, the Orto Botanico with its biodiversity centre, or just a nice walk along the canals outside of the hustle and bustle of the town. I think a few of you went to Zairo that evening and to various other restaurants. next morning we headed off with our bags just round the corner to meet Mario, our driver, and our Gunetto bus. And we were heading off. We were leaving not only Padova, we were leaving the Veneto, and we were heading for the Emilia Romagna. We headed down the A13 motorway past the Euganean Hills, this lovely area outside of Padova formed by a volcanic eruption a long time ago, where the spa towns are. Carried on down that motorway and we passed Bologna. Of course we weren't going there, it was a city and we're on a village tour and small towns. We talked about the University of Bologna, of course, being so important because the main faculty was law, and the reason that law started there was because of the feuds between the Pope and the emperors. Carried on, had a brief comfort stop, our first autogrill. We don't have many on this tour because it's not a motorway tour. And then we were heading on a slight diversion out to the east. We're heading southeast to Ravenna. On the way to Ravenna we talked about what you were going to see with our local guide in Ravenna. But first of all, we talked a little bit about Constantine, because Constantine was the first Eastern Roman emperor in the 4th century who converted to Catholicism on his dying bed, but practiced Christianity. That's most important, Christianity. And he was the first of many Eastern leaders. We talked about how you don't see a crucifix in the Byzantine art because that was not the main teaching, not the fear of the man dying on the cross. It was more the man who came, the light to save the world, the Pancrator. We got to Ravenna, we met up with our local guide and we headed through into the church of San Vitale to see these magnificent mosaics that date back to the 6th century, when the Byzantine church was much more prevalent, in fact, than the Roman Catholic Church. Then from there we headed round into the mausoleum of Galla Placidia, and we saw the smaller mausoleum but with the magnificent mosaics in that museum too, and vivid colours, considering that one even dated back to the 5th century. From there we went on into the Piazza del Popolo and we saw the Venetian influence on Ravenna. We'd already seen it in Padova. They were the great aggressors, the Venetians, of course, back in the 14 and 1500s. Then you were set free, a little bit of time for lunch, and also I think quite a few of you went to see the tomb of the great son of Italy, Dante Alighieri, who went into exile and never really went back to live in his hometown of Florence. And he has his bones are buried there in a little temple dedicated to him. Then we headed off, little time for a bit of a siesta, and then we were heading for the Umbria, heading out of the Emilia Romagna and heading into Umbria. 50 minutes driving, and you opened your eyes, we'd left the plain, the flat land, and we'd arrived in the green hills, the green heart of Italy, Umbria. We drove down through Umbria, where the geology of this country is so obvious, because we talked about how there's more going on under the ground here almost than above the ground, with all the 2 fault lines running through the country all the way down through the Apennines, the Apennine mountains, which run right down the entire length, the spine of the country, joining the Alps at the top to form a T. Carried on further down, had a brief comfort stop at the source of the Tiber, the Tevere. And then we carried down into the central part of Umbria, where we saw a bit more development, more factories and things in the wider valley, and the area where in fact the tobacco is grown. That's one of the main crops of Umbria, the tobacco. And we saw in the distance our first sight of Montefalco was the tower, the water tower. But en route we saw Assisi. We weren't going on that day because we were going on the next day, and past Spello, the lovely ridge town. Then at Trevi we took a right and we went right up into the hills towards Montefalco. We checked into the Villa Pambufetti, where we had our buddy drink. We met up at the pool and had a little bit of Venetian Prosecco round the pool in Umbria. Then into town, an orientation, get an idea of where the restaurants were for dinner that evening. The next morning we were up and off. We were going to meet St. Francis of Assisi. We had a short drive to Assisi, into the lower car park, walked to the lower basilica, and we met up with Vanya, our guide. Little bit of a check at the security check. These wonderful young soldiers that we have at all of our major sites now, just to protect us. They're not at war, they're there to protect us. As it says on their trucks, keeping the streets of Italy safe. We went into the lower basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, and we saw the frescoes there, some more frescoes by Giotto. We heard about Francis, also had an opportunity to go down to his tomb, which is under the altar. We also met another artist there called Lorenzetti. From there we went up to the upper chapel, the main church of San Francesco, and we saw the series on the life and death of St. Francis by Giotto, and also work by his mentor, who was Cimabue. From there out, said goodbye to our guide, and we headed up through the town. We saw the lovely Norberto sculpture of St. Francis coming back from that war with Perugia. And of course everywhere associated with Francis, Pax, peace. That was his dream. Through to the main square, where we saw the temple of Minerva from the 1st century. Split up for some lunch and a bit of free time. And we met up, back to the bus, met up with Mario, back to our villa for a little bit of downtime before, in the early evening, heading down towards Trevi, and we went to San Pietro a Pettine, which is a family who has a truffle farm with a restaurant to go with it, and a beautiful Romanesque church. That's their private church of their villa. We went out with Bruno and Pucci, and we went truffle hunting after we had a nice group photo taken too, with Trevi in the background. And Pucci did his job. He found several truffles, dragging Bruno through the undergrowth. Back up to the restaurant where we had our dinner together, our truffle dinner together. Then back to the villa. The next morning we were heading for a little bit of retail therapy. We were heading for Deruta, which was not too far away. Deruta, the town that is the centre of, really of all the main centre of ceramic in Italy. because even the companies that sell ceramic in the south buy a lot of their ceramic from the Gialetti family that we went to visit, in fact. And there we went through and we saw the process of the clay from the Tiber River that starts that process from a piece of clay to a magnificent work of art. We saw it right through. We met Mauro on the wheel. We went through and met Carlo, one of the brothers, Gialetti, who has this passion for the business. Third generation. We saw the artists painting the pieces after the first glaze. And then we had a little bit of time to look and shop. We left there, following the Tiber River all the way to Orvieto, where the Tiber went left to Rome and we went right. We weren't going straight into Orvieto though. We had a much nicer appointment first. We had to have lunch and we were going to La Tenuta Le Velette, the vineyard of Le Velette. And there we met the lovely Alessandro, the manager there, who gave us a wonderful account of how everything happens in a family vineyard. This vineyard of 750 hectares of land. They export their wines around parts of the world. And then, of course, prior to tasting the wine, however, we had a little visit into the Etruscan galleries under this villa. Then in for the tasting in what was the dining room of this original villa of the 1500s, where the matriarch still lives on the piano nobile, and above us was the god of wine Bacchus in the fresco, and we were tasting the wine. It's amazing how it turned out. That room has become a wine tasting room. And we had our wine tasting of the Le Velette Po. The Po. We're crossing the Po, everyone. We're on our back loop. Remember we crossed it on our first day out? Well, this is us heading back up on these plains of Lombardy. We're on again, heading north this time, however. So we had our tasting, a few purchases of wine, said goodbye to Alessandro, headed to Orvieto, the rock. Bags up in the elevator to the hotel, Grand Hotel Italia, inside the walls of Orvieto. Little bit of downtime, then we met up on the terrace of the hotel. We had our welcome drink from the hotel there, and we did our second language lesson. We'd already had one on the way down as we'd arrived in Umbria, but this one was particularly for the next day. It was for the market that was going to be happening on Saturday morning in Orvieto, because we'd decided that we'd have a picnic. We'd do a picnic on that day. After our language lesson, we headed off an orientation through the town of Orvieto, past some of the restaurants, up to the magnificent site of the Duomo. This Duomo that is my favourite Duomo in the whole wide world, and we saw it without even a scaffold as the sun was shining on those mosaics. You know, Pope Pius the 10th, if I remember correctly, said, the Duomo of Orvieto is so magnificent. She is the lily of Italian cathedrals, and on the last day of judgment she will float to heaven carried by her own beauty. And that says it all. We had a look at the front, talked about all the pilgrims who've been through there over the years and why they came to see this magnificent cathedral, the story of the Bible, all on the front of this church. Inside we saw the very Eastern influence, because Pisa was trading, 10th and 11th century, the golden age of Pisa, trading with the East, and Eastern people working on these. So we had this striped, the green and the white marble. We were heading, first of all, to the beautiful chapel of Luca Signorelli. It was our third chapel. We'd been to the Scrovegni, we'd been to Ravenna to see the mosaics, and this was our third of our cultural sites included in the tour. And we saw this chapel on the very different subject, because Giotto was 200 years before Luca Signorelli, and we saw the life and death and good and evil. That's the main subject of that chapel. Things had changed tremendously in those 200 years. We even saw nudity as people were raising up out of their graves, rather funnily I think, to be resurrected and to head for heaven. We also saw the Antichrist, a very unusual subject, this intertwining of how close good and evil are, the mixture of the Christ, representation of Christ, not Christ, but showing the devil whispering in the ear and intertwined, sharing an arm. Absolutely incredible. We also had a little seat in there. We talked about the different stages of architecture, going from the Etruscans, whom we had not really met yet, but the Etruscans, to the Romans, then on to the Romanesque period, the Gothic period, the Renaissance, the High Renaissance, the Baroque, the Neoclassical, and then that little mini Renaissance where we had your great Frank Lloyd Wright, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, Gaudi, the Bauhaus movement in Austria and Germany, all those huge changes in this mini Renaissance in art and architecture and life too. Although the big change in life, as I said, the biggest of all was the Renaissance. That was the period of humanism. Art changed, but people's lives changed forever too in the Renaissance period. So then, a free evening, you all split up, went to different restaurants. The next morning was market morning. I took my spot, having been to the bakery for the bread. I sat there in the market square, and you all came around and told me what you were buying or what you had already bought. And then we did have a little blip in the weather this time, and it was just a bit dodgy to go to the wall. So we decided we'd just have our picnic, but we had to use the hotel, the little breakfast room in the hotel, which was delightful, a wonderful array of beautiful local fresh produce that you'd all purchased yourselves. Then we went down to the wall for a bit, for those of you who hadn't been down there, and just did a little look over the valley all the way up to Monte Amiata, right up there in Tuscany, the highest point in Tuscany. Then we dropped off our picnic bits and pieces, and we headed for the bus again, and Mario took us to Bagnoregio. We got off of the bus in Bagnoregio and we walked through it to this magnificent viewpoint of Civita, so called the dying city, the dying town. Only 10 people left who actually live, are residents of Civita, this town that an earthquake in the 1600s kind of broke it away, the old part from the newer part, and then over the years, with that breakage in the terrain there, the winds and the rains have kind of worn away the town. You were free in Civita to have a look around, and then we had our hike back to the bus, the most strenuous day of the tour. Back to Orvieto, free evening again for dinner. The next morning we were up and off up the Autostrada number 1, the Autostrada del Sole. We were heading for Chianciano Terme. We weren't going to the spa, however. We were going to the Etruscan Museum, Il Museo Etrusco di Chianciano. There we met Roberto Becchi, who took you on a journey back in time, really, to see this amazing civilization of 4 mean, they were 4 centuries, from the 8th to the 4th century before Christ, the Etruscans. And now you know more about them than probably most people would know, because he brings the museum is wonderful anyway, but he brings it to life. And there we saw the reproduced tombs of the volunteers who run that museum, who have excavated the actual tombs, the sites, the archaeological sites, and then brought everything back into the museum. Wonderful, wonderful experience to see that. From there we said our goodbyes to Roberto and headed only 5 minutes on the bus, where we were going to have lunch and our cooking lesson with our chef Stefano. Again, 3rd generation of a family. This man with such a passion. He's part of the Association of Chefs of Siena. He is just in the slow food movement. He just loves what he does. And he gave us a lovely introduction over a little bruschetta and a glass of wine to keep us going, because after his introduction to his agriturismo La Pietriccia, we then went inside and had the cooking lesson with him, for which you all have the recipes, so we don't need to go over what we ate. We had lunch there with a lovely view of Chianciano, the old medieval town. And from there we headed off. We were heading for our next 2-night stop. We were heading for Chianti. When we got to Chianti, having crossed right across Tuscany to the Belvedere San Leonino, our bed and breakfast stop for 2 nights, checked in to the lovely converted 14th century farmhouse and stables. We met up for a welcome drink from the hotel, and then we went in for dinner together. The next morning we had a free morning. Some of you, a large number of you followed me on my daily, my Chianti Constitutional through the vineyards of Chianti. Back to the hotel, freshen up, onto the bus, and we were heading for Siena. Siena, this largest of the hill towns of Italy, but with an amazing history. We walked through, having taken the little sardine bus, past the Duomo, had a look at the Duomo, exactly the same time scale, early 1200s, the first stone was laid of that Duomo, the same as Orvieto, but much more ornate than Orvieto. And of course inside the cathedral, I know a lot of you went, some of you went to see it, a magnificent museum with the floor all in inlaid marble and that beautiful golden yellow marble of Siena. But we didn't stop there, because we were getting on through. We went down the main street and headed into the Campo. In the Campo we talked about the Palio horse race that is run twice a year in July and August. And the Palio, nothing to do with a horse. The Palio is the banner that is won by the Contrada, or neighbourhood, of the 17 neighbourhoods who run 10 horses in each race each month. And when they win this Palio that is put into their museum. And the horse is taken to the cathedral, and the horse is the hero of the day. It's all bareback, so sometimes the rider just jumps off of the horse and lets the horse win. And then we split up for some lunch, met up again to walk the other side of Siena to come back towards the bus, and en route we stopped at the church of San Domenico, this simple Gothic church, single nave church with no aisles, modern stained glass windows, dedicated to San Domenico, but the relic is of St. Catherine of Siena, this woman with this incredible faith, who was responsible for bringing the popes back from Avignon when they were in exile they'd kind of thought they might just stay there, and she was determined that the head of the Catholic Church should be in Rome. A poor woman died in Rome and was chopped up, so her head is there in Siena. Back to the hotel, some downtime, then we had dinner together. The next morning we were up and off. We were going to Lucca. We were staying in Tuscany, but we were heading for Lucca. But that day is guide's choice, and my favourite hill town of them all is Volterra. So we went to Volterra, where we walked through this perfectly preserved medieval town, because it's so isolated, this inland island, as Ian Forster said. And we walked to see something that is totally unique, the Etruscan archway, the entranceway, the southern entrance to the city, the town of Volterra. And we talked about how just before the Allied forces arrived, the Americans who liberated Volterra, how the residents of the town physically formed a human chain and filled in the archway, and went to the German in charge and said, please don't bomb our gate, because that's what the plan was. It was the plan all through Italy. It was slowing down the Allies, blowing up the bridges over the rivers, the gateways into the towns. And fortunately he was a reasonable person and did not blow it up, and that saved that gate from at least the 4th century before Christ, possibly even earlier. And we talked about how it was the Etruscans who invented the arch, not the Romans. The Romans elaborated on it, but the Etruscans, by goodness, they found out, they realized that keystone was the key to the arch, in fact. Then we carried on to past the Duomo and the baptistry, and then to the Roman site, the Roman amphitheatre, which was discovered in 1928 when an amateur archaeologist who lived in the town was determined to find this town that had this theatre that had been written about. And he did, under what had been the sort of trash can of the town, they found this theatre. The Romans copied the Greeks, of course, in lots of things, and one of the things they copied the Greeks in was the theatres. Then we were in the town of the Alabaster, and I'd already phoned ahead, and we had an introduction by Piero Rossi, again, several generations of the family, and we saw heard about the alabaster, which is created by the evaporation of seawater, and then they take it from the lower part, quite low in the hill. They take out this